Well, thank you for coming back to the second segment of my testimony. I'm very honored that you would. And like I mentioned before, this is going to cover my life in Tennessee. So basically from the ages of 14 to 21 when my first husband and I moved to Southern California. So I mentioned it very briefly, but it was once we moved to Tennessee that things drastically changed for me. My stepfather, who had been all about serving Jehovah, began to sexually abuse me. And it was very subtle in its beginnings. It was a seduction, which has caused problems for me later on in life as far as feeling shame and guilt. And it definitely caused problems for me later on in life with my actions and behaviors. There was also some physical abuse and emotional abuse as well. To throw confusion further into the mix, behind my mother's back, my stepfather would take me to see rated R movies where we would not even see rated PG movies as a family. He gave me clothes that were a lot sexier to change into on the way to school. We listened to rock and roll music. These were all things that were off limits as a family for the first 6 years of my life as a JW, actually 8 years. So there was a real conflicting lifestyle that was initiated into my life. And my mother knew nothing about these things that were going on. A pivotal thing that happened very soon after we did move to Tennessee was I met a boy named Christopher, and I was 14 and he was 16. And he ended up becoming my first real crush, love, whatever you want to call it. He was very quiet, kind of the strong silent type, if you will, and was very kind to me, and that was one of the things that drew me to him. However, it was considered unacceptable for me to have any interest in boys at the age of 14 or 15 years old because dating was for marriage and marriage alone. That was another one of the rules. So I wasn't able to do anything about having a crush on him, really, other than just seeing him at the Kingdom Hall. So life continued on, and like I say, there was all the different abuses that were going on with Chuck. And right before I graduated from high school, I was almost 17 years old. My mom was praying with me one day and basically asked God to help me open up to her about what was wrong. She knew that there was something that was wrong and that was on my heart. And I had her stop the prayer, and I told her everything that had been going on. The sexual abuse, the emotional abuse, the movies, the music, the clothes, everything. And I was blessed that I didn't have a mother that reacted in anger towards me. There was no denial on her part, and so she called the elders, and the elders came to our home that night, and I told them everything that had happened. And Chuck arrived on the scene while the elders were there, and my mom went into the kitchen with him and told him that she knew everything that had happened, and he would not talk to the elders at the time, and literally up and left the next day. Was gone for 2 weeks until my mom and I basically trapped him into thinking that we weren't at home, and he came to leave money and we were there, and asked him to come home. And it never occurred to us that that would be a weird thing to do, an unhealthy thing to do. I know that for me, I just wanted to get back to the family that we were before everything started, and I thought that we would. And that isn't what happened. my stepfather, after my abuse stopped, we were disciplined by the congregation together, even though I know now that I bore no responsibility for what happened. At the time, I did, and that caused a lot of other problems for me as I got older, because discipline indicated to me that I was wrong. So I do want to say to abuse survivors out there that it's important that you know that you did not play any part of responsibility in what happened to you, that it always rests on the shoulders of the abuser. But it's very easy for us to take that responsibility on ourselves. And so it's important to know that there was no responsibility, that you bore no fault in what happened to you. And so for me, the discipline that I received made it even harder for me to understand that concept. Bottom line, I waited 2-3 months, and my responsibilities that had been taken away from me because of my discipline was restored, and I went back to serving Jehovah in the full-time ministry. Well, my stepfather began to verbally and emotionally and sometimes physically abuse my mother. It was like I was off limits, and so he didn't treat me badly, but it was like everything was turned on my mother. And that was worse for me than if he had been doing it to me. I was very close to my mom. I'm an only child. And it was devastating for me to watch him destroy her systematically, emotionally, as a woman. It was a horrible thing to witness. And so it was a very difficult time from the time that I was 17 till I got married at 20. But when I was 18, I started to date Christopher again, secretly. Well, not date again, we hadn't dated before, but it was Christopher, and he and I reconnected, and the attraction was still there. And so the whole time that my mother was being abused, I had a secret life where I was seeing him, and I had this constant struggle of sexual behaviors. I managed to keep my virginity up until the very end before we got married. But there was a lot of behaviors and misconduct sexually besides that I struggled with, between wanting to serve Jehovah and having these desires and acting on these desires. And I did not understand why, but it's another really important fact when you come from abuse, that a lot of times sexual promiscuity is a result of that, because the sexual abuse teaches you, if you will, that your identity is in sex and that your value is in sex. So if you struggle with that, please understand that that's understandable too. Not saying that all that behavior is okay, but the Lord does extend grace to us and does understand that the roots of those issues go all the way back. And so I had a nervous breakdown when I was 18. And that was due to trying to take care of my mother, being in the full-time ministry, having the secret life with Christopher because I was still living at home, and Chuck would never be okay with me seeing him because he wasn't a Jehovah's Witness in good standing. And so I had the secret life going on there, and I was working my own business. And so it all got to be a bit too much for me. And so I had a nervous breakdown, and Christopher helped me to recover from that secretly. Because I had my own business, I had a lot of free time where I didn't answer to Mom or Chuck as far as what I was doing during the day. So that made allowances for me to spend time with him. And so when I was 20 years old and my mom and Chuck were out of the state, Christopher and I got together, and we decided that we wanted to get married. And so that's what we did. We got married when I was 20 years old. My in-laws were thrilled to have me marry Christopher, and they asked me, have you thought about this? And it was the first time that I actually made a conscious decision that I was going to live my life, and it was not going to be based on what Mom and Chuck wanted. And so that was, marriage is a big step anyway, but it was a bigger step for me because I really claimed my independence. And that first year of marriage was a great time. It was a very healthy marriage. We did some temporary pioneering, a few months there. He got baptized during that time. So it was a very good first year for us, very idyllic in a lot of ways. And my mom and Chuck had recovered from their anger over my claiming independence and wanted us to move to Southern California. They had a new invention and they wanted us to work with them on it. And so before our first year anniversary, we packed up a truck and we moved to Southern California. So this segment has been about twice as long. I didn't know how to get it any shorter than this, but I will be covering about the next 10 years of my life in the following segment. And as the first time, I appreciate your time and your attention, and I hope that you have a blessed rest of your day.